Hello and welcome to Smart Money Simplified with Brent Mekosh. Brent, how are you?
I am doing great. I'm looking it's today's very bittersweet. And I think that you know why. I'm looking very forward to this conversation. But at the same point, it's kind of a sad one for me, to be honest with you. So we actually met through this podcast, you and I, and it's been now, we've been about 20 months, I think. It'll be 2 years in November, I think, since we recorded our first one. I think we released them then in January 2022 is when we started, getting them out there to the public. But I got to know you through this medium. And we've now been part of a little over 50 conversations together.
Hmm.
And you are leaving podcasting as a career. And so, a couple reasons that I want to have this conversation with you today is, first, I think it's really fitting that I think that we have this conversation, because I do feel like I've gotten to know you as a person and a little bit what you're about, and I want to, hopefully our relationship continues, but I also want to have a conclusion to at least this facet of our relationship. But secondly, the reason you're doing what you're doing is something I think that is really going to interest a lot of people. A major career change, moving into something that you've had experience with in the past, but has become a passion for you. I think it's just an exciting story, and I want to dive into it. So that's a long soliloquy, I guess, to bring us to this conversation that we're going to have today. So first, man, this is exciting stuff,
Yeah.
and makes me a little sad, but also very, very, I guess, excited for the future that you're going to have.
Yeah. There's a couple of ways we're going to stay connected. Number one, I subscribe to the podcast, right? So as you continue your podcasting career with Bill is going to be a gentleman the audience will meet very soon. I'm going to be listening. And then secondly, I've got all your contact information. You know that dinner is in the future, whether it's your place or my place, and that's a whole
Absolutely.
different ball game when it's my place, right? And we'll
Yep.
talk about
It
that in
will
a
be
minute.
now. We're going to talk about why.
Yeah, it will be now. But I have loved this journey, and yes, you and I align on so many different things, value wise.
Yeah.
And I learned that through this podcast, mainly because of all the amazing guests that you've brought on and who you've targeted as guests to bring on. Just have very honest communication, honest questions, honest interviews. I have enjoyed this more than you'll ever know. So I want to thank you for allowing me to be a small part of this journey. I mean, it was really, I intro the show, I say, hey, Brent, who you got? And you tell me who you've got. And it's always somebody amazing. I just sit there and listen. I get to be part of the live part of this, where all the other listeners are part of the recorded version, which is great. But it was fun being here with you and being able to have the time before we hit record and even after we hit record to get to know your guests a little bit more and get to know you more. So thank you for that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about what you're going to be doing. Or I'll tell you what. Let's start actually with the journey that got you to podcasting, because you're kind of coming back to something that it was very important to you for a long period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So back in 2001, my wife and I had been working with youth in different capacities. That was always one of our passions, something that's always been on our heart. And you've shared a lot of your background, in this podcast. With my background, I had a mom and a dad that were in my life the entire time. My wife did as well. In fact, we're both blessed to both have our parents still. And it was foreign to me, quite honestly, growing up, to have other families that were a dad was absent, or parents were divorced, or kids were in really, really tough, harsh situations. We didn't grow up with a lot of money, but we also didn't grow up with abuse. We also didn't grow up with lacking a lot. It was just, money was tight kind of thing. And so learning, and as I grew, I realized there are kids here in the US that are worse off than me. And it was, as a teenager, I was kind of selfish, and I thought, well, poor me. No. It could have been so much worse. And now I've seen that side, because as adults, we are privy to that, right? Unfortunately, we see that in neighborhoods and see that in different areas of the country. So that was always on my wife and I's heart. And so in 2001, we moved from Washington State, where I was basically raised and loved, to Nebraska to be a part of Boys Town. Boys Town is its own city, started by Father Flanagan, who was a Catholic priest back in 1917. And the interesting part, Brent, is that he actually started working with men. And I know that you have mentored a lot of people, and you've helped a lot of people in business. And through your business, what Father realized was that these men didn't want to change. They were so set in their ways, whether they were homeless and alcoholic, or abusing different substances. They were already stuck kind of in their way. He couldn't get them to change that mindset. So he said, you know what? There's a lot of homeless kids. I need to start there. So he opened Boys Town, which was about 10 miles outside of Omaha at the time, and brought a bunch of homeless kids of all races. And that was actually another thing that I learned more recently. He had to move outside of Omaha and called it its own city so that he could actually integrate Black kids, white kids, Asian kids, all different races, because it wasn't allowed back then because of Jim Crow laws.
Wow.
So
I didn't actually realize Jim Crow was up in Nebraska.
it was, either did I, right? I didn't realize how far it penetrated to different areas, but the city of Omaha would not let him house kids of different races in the same building.
Wow.
And because he started in downtown Omaha when he was starting to get these kids off the street, and they said, you can't do that. So he moved outside of Omaha and started his own city. How's that for gumption?
Yeah, I talk about taking some initiative there. Now, were you raised Catholic?
No, not at all. I was
Okay.
raised non-denominational evangelical Christian, and Boys Town being started by a priest is one thing, but probably the most interesting thing is he was so dynamic that he made friends in every culture, and it was actually a Jewish gentleman that helped to fund all of the start of Boys Town. It wasn't the Catholic Church that backed it with money. The Catholic Church did provide a lot of other assistance and nuns and things that would help with the boys. But financially, it was a Jewish gentleman in the community that was really backing him.
And so how did you and your wife first discover Boys Town? Because obviously you're Washington State, and your knowledge of the mission and the purpose of the organization impacted you enough to say, hey, wait, I'm going to move almost halfway across the country to a new location to do this thing. So tell me about how you came across them to start with.
Yeah, the first time we saw it was I think it was in a parenting magazine, like just an ad, right? And about Boys Town. Maybe it was an ad about family teaching. I'm not sure. That was the first time we saw it. And my wife was pregnant with our daughter at the time. And we're like, well, this is not, we had a job that was developing. I'd worked on computers. I had started doing the Y2K updates, if you remember that, way back in the day for Amazon.com in downtown Seattle. And then the computer company I was working with asked me to do some traveling. And I said, I've got a young family. I'm not going to be away from my family, because they want to be go on the road for like a month at a time. Mm-hmm. And so I talked to my boss, and he was gracious enough. He said, you know what? I know Candy, my wife. Let's hire her too. You guys can go as a family. And so I provided a vehicle and everything for us. And we traveled around the country, which again, at 22 years old or whatever, however old we were, who gets to do that, right? On a company dime. We were able to sightsee all over the place. It was great. But as our kids got a little older, it's about a year and a half later, we're like, we need to settle down. My son's 4. It's time for some preschool. And so we decided we wanted to settle down, and we revisited Boys Town, did a little bit of research, on who they were, what their mission was. And it was beautiful. We're like, okay, we're going to live full time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 with these kids in a home. And we'll have 8 teenagers that live with us, and we're going to help them. And, most of them are coming out of lockup situations. Some of them are orphaned. Some of them are just, their families like, we cannot handle them at this point, or there's something dysfunctional within the family itself, and the kid needs to be taken out of the home for their own safety. And so we thought, well, we love it. We called them up. They interviewed us over the phone. They flew us out probably 2 to 3 weeks later for another interview. And by the time the interview was done, they said, we'd like you to move here. And so we did. And Omaha is great for a lot of reasons, but boy, is it flat.
Yes.
Before, like coming from Washington State to here is like, wow, it's a lot of corn, but the mission is here, right? I mean, that's we love it. So we were at Boys Town from 2001 to 2012, and the main reason that we left was that our biological kids got a little older. If you can imagine, our daughter was raised with 69 brothers. And so it was time to kind of have maybe her time, and we wanted to have a little bit more structure for our son. And so we decided to leave Boys Town at that point.
So when you're in these homes, you're bringing these kids into what essentially is your house to live with your family under your rules. A couple questions around that.
Yeah.
First, were you concerned that a lot of these kids have made bad decisions to get, and also, in their defense, have been brought into very bad situations that have led them to these group homes? Yes. Were you concerned about some of those values or behaviors being rubbing off on your kids since they're living with them now?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that was a concern. When you first do something like this, the concerns were more like, are they going to hurt my kids? Are they going to hurt us if they lose control, if they get frustrated and angry? But I very, very quickly learned that Father Flanagan, I got to go back to one of his quotes. He said, there's no such thing as a bad boy. It's bad environment, bad teaching, and bad example. And that couldn't be more true, Brent, quite honestly. You take a kid out of an environment that has been abusive, or we had one young man that there was no abuse, but he was spoiled rotten. His parents gave him everything he could possibly want. And so when you throw money at a child over and over and over again, they get used to that. And then when you're like, okay, we got to pull that back, then they just throw a tantrum. Doesn't matter what age they are, because they're used to being spoiled. So he was in our house when we first got here as well. And his behaviors were that of a toddler, right? Throwing tantrums whenever he didn't get his way, because he was trained that way, right? It wasn't something that he was born with. He was trained that way by his parents, and his parents had to learn to do something different, and he had to learn to do something different. So that was probably the first thing. But very quickly you learn that these kids, once you give them love and structure and discipline, every kid craves that. Quite honestly, they won't tell you, oh, I love discipline. They're not going to tell you that. But because it's structure and they understand structure, they appreciate it, even if they don't like it at the moment, and they excel when you do that. So we did actually have a situation where one of the other reasons that we left after all those years was because my son got older, and as the older he got, the less he was like the protected little brother. And then all of a sudden he was becoming a peer to the young men we were having come into the home, because he's a teenager and so are they. And so he wanted to emulate what they were. But a lot of these kids were coming out of very broken homes and gang life and a lot of violence. And so they're pretty tough kids. And so my son kind of looked at them and going, oh, I want to be tough. Right. So that was one of the other decisions that we made, that, it was time for us to go, because we did not need that type of influence for him.
Right. So 2012, you make a decision to leave, or now, as we know, put it on hold. Then what happened?
Well, one of the gentlemen that actually, Matt Halloran, that started at Boys Town at the same time, his wife and him were family teachers, just the same as Candy and I were. We became fast friends because we were in the training group together, and obviously we're learning as we went. Became fast friends and just ended up like brothers. He had already left. Him and his wife were there, I think, 5 years. And then, like I said, my wife and I were there for almost 12. And when we left, he and I started a company called Top Advisor Coaching. And we started coaching business owners, and mainly our bread and butter, if you will, was financial advisors. And in 2015, I branched off from him and started my own company, Axis Coaching and Consulting, Axis, AXIS, and just focusing on Christian advisors and Christian business owners, because that's where my passion was. And Axis being the center of the earth, right? So if Christ is our center and everything revolves around that, then that's what I believe we should be doing in our life in our entirety, business and personal. And so I started that. And in 2018 is when he actually called me up, and I was still working with clients, and he said, hey, I need your voice. And I was like, what are you talking about?
And it is a magnificent, it's a magnificent voice.
Why, thank you. I appreciate it. So he said, hey, he transformed his company, Top Advisor Coaching, into Top Advisor Marketing with a gentleman from Canada. And they were doing podcasting. And so he called and said, hey, you want to do this? And it was just kind of a part-time thing, a little extra money on the side, a little, it's still coaching and it's still teaching, which is what I'm passionate about. And then it was so much fun. It pretty much took over my entire business. And I slowly weaned down my coaching clients and took all podcasting clients.
So tell me about before we dive into the decision you made, obviously now to go back to Boys Town. But the podcasting thing to me is very interesting, because it's one of the reasons I'm doing this is it's a medium that I absolutely love. I love having these long form conversations. I don't like the fact that I think in our culture and our media and everything, you're breaking things down into 140 character tweets or 30-second sound bites. The ability to give people the platform to express themselves for more than 30 seconds at a time, I think is very valuable. What's still even surprising to me with my broker dealer Raymond James, which I'm grateful that they okayed this and green lighted this, it's a really small amount of financial advisors that are doing this for a lot of reasons, compliance reasons and everything else. But what have you found? But you've been part of this explosion now where people are talking about it more, where people in various industries, not just financial services, but in almost, it could be health and wellness and all these other things, realize that they might have something positive to say, or their guests might have something positive to add to this national conversation about a lot of different issues. What was it like being part of that? I mean, podcasting obviously goes back, well before 2018.
Yeah.
But I think that in this mass adoption from a lot of different people viewing it as a medium that they can participate in, that's been relatively recent. So what was it like being in that explosion?
It's been very fascinating to me as somebody who looks at trends and kind of studies human behavior. It has been pretty wild. The funny thing is that before I ever started doing the podcasting thing, I was teaching clients how to be more personal with their own clients. And a lot of it revolved around personal videos. There were some programs out there that would allow you to shoot some video, 2-3 minutes, but it was more personalized. And I said, this is how you build relationships. You can send an email to somebody. They can't hear your voice. They can't see your face. They can kind of understand your intent, but most emails are going to be just blanket emails or market updates, or they're going to be, every 2 weeks they're putting out a note, right? That just to every client. When you can personalize it and people hear your passion, they hear who you are at your core, that's when relationships are built. So I was doing some of this, but not in the podcasting form with clients beforehand. So when Matt called me and said, hey, this is what we're doing, I'm like, that's brilliant. This is what has been needed for a very long time. And then COVID hit, right? Mm-hmm. People couldn't go out places. They couldn't, they're getting sick of streaming. Nothing against Netflix. I enjoy it. I enjoy streaming my shows, but there are only so many shows you can watch. It becomes mind numbing if you're just binging stuff all the time, no matter what platform it is. But then podcasts give you so much more than just staring at a screen. If you listen to a good podcaster like yourself, it's interactive. There was a meme a while back where it showed what a podcast should feel like. And it was two people talking in like the studio type chairs. You can see that they're studio type chairs. And then there's somebody in a chair that's right next to them, just kind of sitting with their hands on their knees, watching this conversation go back and forth. That's the listener. They should feel like they're in the room with you. And that's what you do beautifully with your guests, because it's like what your guests want to ask, and you ask those types of questions. So when you do it well and people find podcasts, they get hooked very quickly. My daughter's hooked to a couple of them that I find interesting. I would never, binge listen to, but whenever she's in the car, she just pops it on. It's a portable medium that you can pause at any time. You're not going to miss out on anything. So especially during COVID, people were just tired. And so they turned to podcasting. They started to figure that out more. And the fact that podcasting is essentially anybody can do it. They could do it by themselves at a very, very low cost to get it out on all the different channels. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, anybody can do it, right? And we've seen that a lot of people have tried. And I think the last stat that I told you was like, most people stop after six podcasts. So for you to be over 50 is fantastic. But you have something here that's worthwhile. Most people that are done at 5 or 6 podcasts or whatever, it's because they've said all they can think of to say, and then they're like, I don't know what else to do, right? So it's fun to watch, and the growth has been explosive, and I don't think it's going away anytime soon. I think it's just going to be, people are going to refine their craft better, and they're going to wean some of the stuff out. They self-select out, honestly, if they're doing less than 6. But for the most part, it's something where people really find value because they feel like they're part of a conversation, even if they're not there in studio.
I totally agree with that. And I think what it's going to be is the evolution of talk radio in a way where there's something that's, it's very comforting about hearing another human being's voice on whether it's the radio or whatever it is. And for me, long drive. And it's better almost, I listen to a lot of audiobooks, but it's different because it's back and forth. It's not just someone reading you a story. There's a back and forth. And when many of the people we've had the pleasure to speak with, I mean, you dive into people's personal stories like your own that we're talking about today. The tapestry of humanity is unbelievable, know. And when you can get people to open up and share about that, that's fantastic. So did the podcasting thing, and obviously part of that whole growth. What gave you the calling to now make the jump back into Boys Town?
I'm blaming my wife. So just like every other organization, Boys Town's having trouble finding good qualified people to work with these kids. And last year they did something that I thought was very, very interesting. They said, we would love to be able to open it up to people that have been family teachers before, because once you're part of Boys Town, a lot of people stay. So my wife was still working for Boys Town, not as a family teacher, but she was working in another department. And I could go on for about 2 hours on talking about all the different departments within Boys Town, but she was part of a group called MST, which is multi-systemic therapy. And their goal is to get a therapist into a family before a child is ever removed, before they ever get to Boys Town. So Boys Town wants to take care of a family before a child is removed, during the process, if it has to happen. While the child is there, they're helping to teach the parents, while we as family teachers are helping to teach the child. Once they go home, there is another whole program that helps them be successful once they go back home. So MST works with the family. They also work with the school that the kid's going to. They also work with a PO if there's one involved, to try to stop the possibility of them being removed. Right. So it was amazing that she ran the show over there in a administrative capacity very, very well. But Boys Town put out this all call, basically. If you've been a family teacher before, we would love for people to be on call with assistants. So every family teaching couple, my wife and I, we have an assistant that works with us for 45 hours a week. And we can use that for downtime. So 2 days a week, we get what's called downtime. It's not a day off, but it's downtime. So we can be out of the house, or we can go into our private quarters and just kind of relax for a while. We choose to usually go out and spend time with the grandkids and do stuff. Date. We're dating again, because we have a little bit of time off and we don't have all those kids at that point. But we have an assistant that is fantastic. He's an amazing guy. He has very similar tolerances to us, so we work together very well. We're very strict, and so is he. So it's great. But they needed more assistants because they didn't have enough. So they put an on-call assistants. And my wife said, I want to do that. I think that'd be fun. I'm like, here we go. Here we go. Yeah. So she signed up, and they said, yeah, we'd love to have you come in this Saturday and work with this home. The family teachers are going to be off that day and there's nobody to cover. So, would you work with them? Absolutely. So she worked there that entire day. Came home, and it was like, for me, it was like drinking from a fire hose, because she's like, oh, I got to tell you, we did. She was so excited, Brent. She was just like, it was so much fun. I was like, okay, I know she's got the bug again, and I've never lost it. I enjoy what I do. The decision wasn't, I'm not going to say it wasn't easy, because it was an easy decision to apply. And they asked us to come back. So we pretty much knew it was a yes, because they had already asked. But it was like, okay, financially, this is going to be a little bit different than we're at now. It's a bit of a pay cut, which is fine, because again, if every day you're doing what you love and you see the impact and the changes, it's a no-brainer for me. I mean, it's just, I don't think anybody would hesitate. I know you do what you do because you see the lives of your clients change, and you see the multi-generational effect that you have. And that's what I'm still riding high from. Like I said, we had 68 young men in our program the first time. We keep in contact with most of them. I have a young man that his father was terrible. I mean, he just abusive, verbally abusive. I mean, treated him terribly. And he said, I'm never going to be a dad. I don't want to be a dad. I can't imagine being a father, because there really isn't a good father out there that I've seen. And I'm not patting myself on the back, but through that relationship, he finally told us, near graduation, he goes, you know what? I think I could do that. Now he's got 4 kids. He's coached all their baseball teams. He's 35 years old. His wonderful wife, beautiful family, successful in his job. And those are the things that I still carry, right? That fuels me for these guys that I have in my house now, because right now they're knuckleheads. Right now they're not making good decisions. I know that through love, through discipline, through structure that we're providing, and the fact that they're not in lockup, they're going to get more out of this than they think. And eventually these young boys are going to be young men, and then they're going to be men with families, and they're going to be successful contributors to society that they would have just been a drain before. So yeah, long answer to a short question.
but give me, so now that you're back, it's been the last 3 months, 4 months that you now are back in the house.
Yep.
And you've got now kids coming in. What is that like? Because now you're taking young men that have been coming out of very challenging environments, and it could be, like you mentioned, being spoiled, to outright awful abuse, to you name it. And you're putting them all together, first of all, in this house where I'm guessing they don't know each other and they don't know
Correct.
you. Like, what's day one like for a young man that arrives at your house?
A lot of side glances. They look at us really suspiciously, like, why are
What's
you
in it for
really
this guy?
here? But yeah,
Yeah.
what do you get out of this kind of thing?
Yeah.
And they get, if anybody looks at what Boys Town is, and if you Google it, if you like Google Map Boys Town and see what you find. It's its own city. It looks like a very wealthy neighborhood. It looks like a college campus. A lot of times people say there's a high school, middle school, fire department, police department, post office, hospital, all on campus. A lake that we get to fish at, a water tower, just like any other small town. And you'll see it looks like a college campus or a very wealthy neighborhood. So they think that, oh, well, maybe they get paid really well or whatever. They have no
Yeah.
idea what to expect. And
Yeah.
honestly, Brent, it's a trust issue, right? Why should they trust me? Why should they trust my wife and I? They shouldn't, quite honestly, at the get-go. I don't want them to from moment one, because that would be a red flag to me. If you trust
Right.
somebody the first time you meet them, no. So we build that trust over a bit of time. And when we hold them accountable and we tell them, and we don't raise our voices to them, right?
Mhm.
Because that's what they've experienced a lot. We don't hit them, which a lot of them have experienced before. I had a young man that decided to steal something from a peer. We knew he did it. I'm just like, here's the thing: you made a mistake, own it. Don't own the thing you took. Own your mistake, right? And he's like, well, what are you talking about? It took about 2 hours for him to admit that he had done it. And I said, okay, great job. Go get it. Let's give it back to him. And then you're going to make an apology. I'm going to what? You're going to make an apology, because how would you feel if somebody stole something from you? It's kind of those rationales that you go back and forth, and you teach them understanding. You teach them empathy. You teach them compassion for somebody else, because a lot of it is fight or flight, right? When
Mhm.
they first come in. And so it's just a process. Some kids are harder to break through to than others. Some of them don't get it. I think I shared with you, we had a young man that he was with us for about a month. He was a transfer from another home. It was kind of a, hey, this is his last chance. He just refused to change certain behaviors, and he got terminated. He was released from the program, because I will fight for my guys until the very bitter end, and they know that. However, if they're doing something that's going to jeopardize somebody else's treatment or somebody else's progress and making a better life for themselves, I can't defend them at that point. I can't put another kid at risk. And he was having some relations with girls, and the girls that come to Boys Town, because there are boys and girls, they have their own issues. And most
Sure.
people on this, they're listening to this, can figure that out. A lot of them have been abused. A lot of them have been over sexualized. And so they seek out love and understanding and support from a male figure in wrong ways a lot of times. And especially when it's another teenage boy, they want that approval so badly that they do things that they just shouldn't, because they think that's what they have to do. And if the boys are taking advantage of that or just being a participant in that, that's going to harm her in the long run. And so he ended up being terminated, and it's always heartbreaking, but at the same time, again, we're not going to risk anybody else, right?
Yeah.
So some kids get it very quickly, and I don't know if I shared the story with you, but there was a young man who was in lockup and came to us, and he was only with us for about a week before we went to a town called Okoboji in Iowa. Boys Town has a small camp there, and they have speedboats, and it's like a 3-day vacation for the kids. And so 3 of our houses go over there. And they have speedboats and all sorts of different activities. And so I'm out there yanking this kid around on a tube, and he's having a great time. And we pull him back into the boat, and he sits back. He's exhausted because he's been hanging on, right? And he's dripping wet. And he goes, "Can you believe this?" And I was like, "What?" He goes, "Last week I was in lockup, and today I'm doing this."
Yeah.
And, and I got choked up. I'm like, this is why we're back, right? This is why we came back, because we know that there's opportunities out there for these kids. And it's not all about skiing and, inner tubing behind a boat. It's about not being in lockup and getting an education and having 3 square meals a day and somebody who loves you and peers around you that you can go play football with or go fishing with. And it's about being a kid, right?
Yep.
And then becoming a man or becoming a young woman.
Do you have a challenge when you bring these young guys in with them being willing to accept themselves that they have worth?
Yes, because the narrative for them has
always
been the
been you're
opposite.
worthless. Yeah.
A lot of it, not all of them. A lot of them have had supportive parents. And I'll tell you, a lot of the situations that end up happening is that, and It's fathers, the lack of fathers. It's just,
Yeah.
let's just be very, very honest. Men that have left these kids' lives, our young men specifically. So now you've got a single mom who's working her tail off, probably has a couple kids, most likely. In most scenarios, they do. Working their tail off at a job that they're maybe spending 10 hours a day, maybe even 12 hours a day, trying to support a family because there's no other support because the men are gone.
Yep.
And now you got a teenage boy that comes home from school, nobody's there because mom's at work. She's trying her best, but she can't hold him accountable. She can't discipline him the way she should or could want to because she's not there. Right. And by the time she comes home, he's already going out and doing stupid stuff. So he's getting in trouble with the law. He's involved in these other kids that are just on the street, which is usually a gang situation.
Right.
And then they fall in. I don't want to say fall into. They choose to do the wrong thing because that's where they're feeling support, because they're not feeling supported at home because, again, mom's out working. And it's I don't want to call it a catch-22, but it is such a trap at this point that because of the lack of strong, stable families, these kids fall through the cracks. And where they get caught is in the court system. And then they end up either in jail or they come to us. And I thank God for any program that will work with youth to get them out of lockup because they don't belong there, and help them to see a better way. So yeah, it's that self-worth is a big piece of it. And they have to learn that. I've got one young man who we're almost to the point where we need to either stop phone calls home. Not that we want to separate him from his family, but every time he calls, his father gets on the phone and says, well, it's only a matter of time till you screw up. You're doing well now. You can tell me all you want, but I know you, and you're going to blow this. And it's just like, and then we have to work with him for the next 2 to 3 hours. Number one, he's usually crying at that point. And then we just have to work with him and tell him, it isn't true. You don't have to do that. You're doing really well. You're trying new things. He's tried, so far he's tried football camp. He's in wrestling camp right now. He's trying things that he's never done before, getting some physical exercise, which he had bounced around from foster to foster to foster before. And a lot of foster families are great. Some of them just say, hey, sit down and relax and we'll get you some food. And that's kind of where he was at. It was like watching TV all day, playing video games, and they'd feed him. So he gained weight and he's like, I don't feel good in my body. I'm like, all right, well, we're going to get you some exercise, buddy. And so him and I ride bikes, and do that together because I could lose some weight too, that. So it is hard to break through that self-worth or that doubt of self-worth. Again, each kid's different, but this one we're working on a lot right now because he's heard a lot of negative things, and he needs to understand that there's so many positive things about him.
What percentage of these kids that you have coming in come from single parent or broken households?
No, I couldn't give you a percentage, but the vast majority. I remember, so out of right now, out of my 6 that I've got, and I'll have 2 more by the time school starts. I get another one here in a week. And then another one I think comes 2 weeks after that. Out of my 6 right now, 1 has a father in his life that is active and positive. Okay. The other one, the one I just mentioned, he has his father and he has a grandfather involved, but no mom, which is more rare, that there's not a mom involved. But the rest are single family households, or maybe he's got, some aunts or uncles that are around, but the father's not in the picture.
Yeah. And I, that's absolutely tragic, because I will say that, come on, man, men in this country got to step up. We have to. I mean, the fact that you look at, it's not a popular opinion, but it's statistically true. Graduate from high school, don't have a kid out of wedlock. You eliminate like 95% of the poverty and a ton of bad outcomes. Yeah. And to, any men out there that step up and take responsibility, mm-hmm. Because when you have kids, it ceases to be about you. Yeah. It's not about you anymore. And
I'd love it if they heard that message, really, truly took it to heart.
You can't say it though. It's one of those politically incorrect things. And that, if anything, that is not a knock on, I mean, if you look at I think the person in this society that has one of the hardest positions in the entire world is a single mother. Yeah. That's trying to do all of these different roles. And the reality is men and women are wired differently. Mm-hmm. There's the empathy that my wife will deliver to our children in a way that I'm incapable of doing. There's
Mm-hmm.
discipline and structure that I can deliver on the kids in a way that she's not capable of doing. And you really need both of those. But what you're finding is, and it's a blanket statement, it's not true in every case, but statistically anyway, the moms are there doing everything they absolutely can, and we're the dads. And I think about a lot of these social problems, not to get off on a soapbox, but we do have in this country right now. Where are the men? Where are the men?
Yes, 100%.
Where are
100%.
they? Where are they? They don't, they're either intimidated because they don't want to be called whatever, whatever name it might be, or they're just content to not care. I mean, it's and to hear what you're doing now, like you're essentially taking on the role of dozens, dozens of men in this case. But I was just, from my own perspective, from my own curiosity, I guess I was wondering what you saw there. I guess it's different for every kid, but how is there a moment when a light clicks for them where they realize, okay, this is different. I can trust Aric. I can trust his wife. I can trust the space that I'm in. Does that happen on, is there a flash? Is it a light bulb moment? Or is it something that takes time?
A bit of both.
It takes time, obviously, but
I hate to say it that way, but it is a bit of both. There are times when you will absolutely see the behaviors change 180 degrees. And that's when we know they're bought into the program. They're bought into my wife and I, meaning they have that trust. They know that they can let their guard down. Some get there like in that moment, and they just completely flip a switch, and that's it. Some of them, it takes time, and it's very, very gradual, but it's almost like it's like climbing a mountain, just very, very slowly. And then you just see them at that summit. You're like, okay, they finally kind of arrived. Right. Yeah. And then the other group is perfect example is my wife was, when she was doing the on-call assistant job one day, she was out with the boys at a park. She had taken them out, and they had never been to that park before. There were so many things to climb on, and it was stuff for kids, but they built it for big kids and adults to be able to climb on too, so everybody could play together. And all these kids are having such a great time. And she saw this kid laughing and laughing and laughing. And all of a sudden he just stops and he looks around, and then he's like, just kind of takes a deep breath, and he walks off, and he walks over to this tree, and he ends up climbing into the, one of the branches, and he just sat there. And Candy's like, that was really just an odd moment. Right. And she walked over, and she realized very quickly, he realized he was having fun, right, and he wasn't supposed to. He wasn't supposed to have fun, because that would be a kid having fun, which he is. But he was living on the street for 2 years, taking care, like in and out of a car, things like that. He was taking care of his father, who was alcoholic and abusive, and just trying to keep him safe. And he had to be the adult at 14. And so now you're in an environment where you can be the kid. You don't have to get the food. You don't have to prop somebody up as they throw up on themselves because they're just drunk out of their minds. You don't have to do all these things anymore. You can have fun. You can play at the park. You can ride bicycles. You can go fishing and not worry about what comes next, or if you're going to eat that night, or any of that. And so he battled with that back and forth. And I've seen him lately. He smiles a lot more. We hope that he's getting to that point, because he's not in our home. He's in another home. But we've seen kids like that before, where they just all of a sudden they're like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be this happy, kind of thing. And we just have to. They're not computers, but we have to reprogram them. We have to reprogram the way they think, and what they know as a reality, that what was before wasn't right. That was not how a young person should be living from 12 to 14, in and out of cars or shelters, and you being the main person bringing food to your younger sibling and your father.
Right.
No, and their younger sibling is also in a program where they are getting help as well. So it's not just him, but yeah, so it is individualized for sure.
So tell me, obviously your Christian faith is very important to you. I'll go out on a limb and say it's probably a big part of the journey that led you here. Mm-hmm. Is that part of your teaching with the kids, or like how do you weave? Because I do think everyone has religion, and there's no true. I do not believe that there are true atheists or secular humanists. There's There's people that have, everyone has an ideology that they will live by. So there's some kind of value system there. But do you teach that to the kids, or how does religion or faith play a role in how you develop these young men?
I'm going to go back and quote Father Flanagan, because again, when he set up Boys Town, he did not set it up as a Catholic organization necessarily. Now, the Catholic Church was heavily involved, which is great, but he accepted every child, Muslims, Jews, people of all faith could go there. People of no faith could go there. Native American kids. So I have a Native American young man in my program. He does not claim to be Christian or of any faith. Father Flanagan's quote was, "Every boy must learn how to pray. How he prays is up to him."
Okay.
That was how he ran it. He's like, we're going to respect everyone's race, creed, color, culture, all of it, because these kids should not be homeless, right? And that's what he was really facing, especially during the Depression. I mean, you had kids that were just shipped off or abandoned. So he had, at one point, he had like 1,200 kids at Boys Town on the farm. We don't have that capacity now, but he made it work, right?
Right.
So as far as our teaching, we respect all religions and all faiths. Our Native American young man does not go to church on Sunday, but we do require him to understand and study his faith. He is involved in sweat lodges, and we're going to a powwow actually next week. So we want to be a part of his culture, and he loves, oh, good Lord. He and my wife had a contest to see who could cook the best fry bread. And he was so excited to bring that to the other boys in the home, right? Because that's part of his culture. That's part of his heritage. As much as my wife is Hispanic, and you and I spoke about the fact that we run Cinco de Mayo here, and we had 150 people over at our house on Cinco de Mayo. We were only in the home 2 weeks, but they knew we were back, and that's something that we had done before. So all of it is celebrated. And so we have Muslim kids on campus that they go to their own services on, I think they go on Fridays. We have Jewish kids that they go on Saturdays, right? So it's something that we encourage them to explore their faith, understand their faith. We do have a Catholic church on campus and a Protestant church, and they're huge chapels. Sorry. Edit team. I don't know if you heard that or not. I know I've got my noise canceling, but my phone rang really loud. Sorry.
Oh, no, I didn't hear it.
All right. Yeah. Well, noise canceling did its job. It was super loud. All right. I'll just pick up from all face. So we do have a Catholic church on campus. We do have a Protestant church on campus. They're beautiful. And the majority of the kids go there on Sunday, and they just split. And we as family teachers take them there, participate with them. And then we do come back together, usually Sunday brunch. And we talk about what we learned in church. And if our young man has done any study in that morning, we ask him, what did you learn about your faith? Or what did you study this morning? And so it's an opportunity for them to understand and have that diverse group, and not judge somebody by any of those things that right now the public judges everybody by, right?
Sure.
So they learn how to live with each other and different ways to pray and different thoughts to think, and really understand where somebody else comes from.
Now, none of this is free. How does Boys Town pay for all this?
So there's a couple different ways. Number one, there are privately placed kids, but that's rare. It's just really rare. It would be, we did have that one young man that I told you about before that was ultra spoiled. His parents paid full price every bit of his stay they paid for, and because they could afford it. I mean, they were very, very extremely wealthy. But most of the kids, like I said, are probably coming out of a lockup situation. And so the state, they are paying a certain amount per day for a child to be incarcerated, and they will pay a certain amount to Boys Town per day for them to be at Boys Town. I don't know how the billing works. We don't get into any of that as family teachers. We don't care. That's not our job. The financial department, that's their deal. So the states don't pay what it costs to keep a kid here. They never will, because it's expensive to provide all these things for these kids, and the schooling and the educational support. For every year they go to school here, they make up about 2 to 2.5 years of what they've lacked, because most of our kids come to us 3 or 4 grades behind. So Boys Town's able to catch them up and have them graduate on time, which is insane. It's crazy how good they are. Yeah. So there's all these different things that Boys Town provides. So one of the main things is donations. Right now, there was a 1938 movie with Mickey Rooney and Spencer Tracy called Boys Town. It was modeled after Father Flanagan. It was his story. Wonderful. It won an Academy Award. The Academy Award is sitting in our little museum here on Boys Town property. That really obviously boosted. Actually, I found out that right after the movie came out, donations dropped because people thought, oh, they must have made a ton of money from the movie. Boys Town did not make a ton of money from the movie. And Spencer Tracy actually partnered with Boys Town after that. When he heard that, he went on and made public announcements, and he spoke in public multiple times. Look, Boys Town didn't make money off this movie. This was this is a private endeavor or whatever. Please donate. And so donations raised at that point. But yeah, it was a little scary there for a moment in the late 30s, especially after the Depression and everything, that, oh, they made a bunch of money, we don't need to donate anymore. No, please do. So
well, how do people find Boys Town now?
Boystown.org.
If this story has inspired them, how they learn more and potentially help out?
Boystown.org. You'll find everything there. All the different programs, all the different ways people help. And yes, there's definitely links to, how you can donate. And specifically, there's so many different ways you can donate, helping kids' future education. There's a lot of people that like, I want to give scholarships to the graduates. That's a beautiful program. This last year we graduated, I want to say there was just over 70 young people, young men and women. And a lot of them walked away from here because of the work they've done with close to full ride scholarships for college.
Wow. That's incredible.
Because where else are they going to get their money, right? They're coming from very impoverished areas, and they've changed their life. And there are a lot of people that are saying, you've done well, let's reward you. And then other people, obviously, they donate to Boys Town and its cause and what they do here on a daily basis.
Well, it's a wonderful story. Obviously, we'll stay in contact for sure. But I obviously wish you and your wife and all these young men that you're mentoring and bringing into your home the absolute best. And I know that that you're making generational changes here with these kids that you're working with, and as you mentioned, when they grow up then and have their own families, like, you've broken a cycle here. And so I can't possibly commend you enough. And from my standpoint, it's been awesome getting to know you now for pushing 2 years. Oh, not quite. And I'm looking forward to many more years of friendship with you.
Yeah, Brent, again, thank you. This has been amazing. And yeah, I hope to continue the work that we started the first time and have many more success stories coming your way.
Definitely.
All right. Well, I guess I got to close this out one more time, right?
You do. Yeah. Yep.
For the last and final time. And man, what a blessing this has been. Thank you so much, listening audience, for listening to the Smart Money Simplified podcast with Brent Mekosh. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please do, right? Because here's the thing. He's got more guests better than me coming up, and you're going to learn a ton. So please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Brent comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. And we do humbly ask that you share this podcast, rate it, and leave a review, as this will help others find the show. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at MP Advisors, this is Aric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.